This video is designed to allow you to learn some skills around going from the data that you've collected towards a graph that illustrates the relationship between the variables in those data. And so in particular we're looking at some data that's here in this table. So just to go through the imaginary prac we're looking at, the key question is, how does the level of watering affect the mass of fruit produced per tree on some peach trees? Our independent variable is the level of watering, measured in litres per day, and the dependent variable is the mass of fruit produced in kilograms. The hypothesis being that increasing the level of watering will increase the mass of fruit produced until it reaches a maximum threshold. So just a note on hypotheses. So the hypothesis is a testable statement which predicts the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. So as we can see from this sentence, it's a statement saying that increasing the watering will increase the mass of fruit. That is testable. It talks about that relationship, increasing one will increase the other, and of course it has to mention both the variables, the level of watering and the mass of fruit produced. If your hypothesis doesn't mention both of those variables, then it's not a well-formed hypothesis. So the experiment has been completed and we've got our independent variable here, the level of watering, and there are 5 different treatment levels for that. So one treatment is no watering, another treatment 10 litres per day, and so on. We have 3 replicate trees for each treatment. So tree 1 at level 0 gave 89 kilograms of fruit. Tree 1 at level 10 gave 122. So these might be different trees, but there were 3 trees at this level and 3 trees at this level. So it's important, first of all, when laying out your table to look at a number of things here. And this is an incomplete table, but it does show you some of the parts that are important. Number 1, make sure your units are with your title so that you don't put 0 litres per day, 10 litres per day, 20 litres per day, because when we go to analyze these data in Excel, those letters are going to cause trouble. So your data should just be as numbers, but the units need to be there in the title. So water, litres per day, mass of fruit, kilos. The other thing to note is that I'm putting the replicates across. So a replicate is the same treatment level and another set of data for that same treatment level. So 89, 95 and 112 are all replicates because they're all under the same conditions, all 0 litres per day. 122, 144 and 42 are all replicate because they're all data coming from that same treatment level of 10 litres per day. And I'm putting those across the page. So how are we going to analyze these data? So the first thing I want to do, because of both data analysis, mathematically averaging these, and producing graphs is easily done in Excel, I'm going to copy and paste these data over to Excel. Just a simple matter of highlighting, Control-C to copy, and then Control-V to paste. So here are those data ready for analysis. So what analysis will I do? Well, one of the obvious things to do with replicate data like this is that because those 3 are under the same treatment, what we can do is average those data. So I'm going to write average there, and what we're talking about where the average is the mean, and that'll also be in kilos of fruit produced. The beauty of Excel is that I don't have to go to my calculator now to calculate that average. Excel isn't just for making tables, it actually has formulas in it that will help you to analyze your data. To tell Excel that you're putting in a formula, you start with the equals button. And in fact, it's probably better to enter the data up here, or the formulas. You can use this formulas tab as well, but because average is one that I use very often, I know that average is there, and you can see actually as you start typing average, it'll give you average, and it says returns the average, the arithmetic mean of its arguments, which are the data that you put in, which can be numbers, names, arrays. So array is a selection of cells or references. So if I keep writing average, in order to put in those arguments or the things that the function needs to do its calculation, I enter a bracket. And you can see there's the format. You put in number 1, then a comma, number 2, and all of the numbers that you're averaging. But again, Excel makes this really easy to enter the data. I'm just going to do an array. So now with my mouse, I click and drag across those 3 cells. What it's done is automatically put in the reference D6 to F6. So D6 is that cell, over to F6, which is that cell. And if I close the brackets, press enter, it's calculated the average in there for me. Now if I click on that cell, what it shows you is the formula here. The function has gone to be in capitals, which means it was a recognized function. If you spelled that wrong, it would give you an error code in here and you could see what you need to correct up here. So first of all, it's calculated the average for me and so I don't have to do it. Second thing is, now that that average is there, I can take the contents of that cell and copy it, Control C, paste it into the next cell, and now that's average, but you see it's automatically changed the range to being D7 to F7, calculated that for me. Even better, if I highlight that and if I mouse over this corner, you can see that that cross changes. I can drag that, fill the rest of those down with the average. So it's automatically redone that array to being those three data there, 3 data points. So my calculations have been averaged automatically for me, which is great. So now I have the level of water and the average mass of fruit produced. So I'm ready to plot these data. Now, this method for plotting the data might seem a little bit more complicated than what you've done in the past, but it allows you to plot just this and this, because we only want to plot the average. If we highlight this whole table, we'll end up plotting individual data for all the trees, which we don't want. So I'm going to go to Insert, use Scatter Graph. Because this is numerical data, I want to use Scatter Graph. Don't use line graph or column graph for this. And you can see there's nothing in there. That's because I haven't told it which data yet. So I need to come to Select Data. So I'm going to add a series. That series is just going to be called Average. Mass. Now what's the X values? So the X values are the values of the independent. So this one here is a really useful button for selecting a range. If I click on that, then I can just drag through those. The alternate is you just click in there and then highlight the ones you want, and it enters that range as well. So it's the average mass. The X values are 0, 10, 20, and the Y values are 98.6, 102.67, 156, etc. Okay, and okay. So there the 5 data points are plotted out. Don't stop at this point. Clearly that's a graph that doesn't give me any information. If you put that into your prac report, I don't know what these numbers are, I don't know what those are, that title is not very useful. So we need to go in and fix things up a little bit. So we're going to add some chart elements. So first of all, I need to put titles on my axes. So primary horizontal, what we're putting in there is basically this information, that's the level of water provided, and that's liters per day. I want a vertical axis. Average mass of fruit produced in kilograms. And I want to edit the title. So check back to here. What we're looking at is how does the level of watering affect the mass of fruit produced. So we want to answer that question, or saying that our data is answering that question by looking at the effect of watering on mass of fruit produced. So this title should be informative of what the graph will be telling us about. So the other thing I just want to note before we get further on this data analysis is you can see that there's what might be a curve up here is what we're expecting, but there's a bit of a dip here. And you may have noticed by looking at the table that this data point, although these three are replicate and you'd expect them to be about the same, is a bit low. Now this is a question of debate, and it's probably worth, if you're not sure about a question, to check this with me. But some data points like this that are considered outliers, it's useful to remove them from your data in order to provide data that is more representative, but you do always have to note that in your discussion. So what we're saying here is that the data point for tree 3 at 10 litres per day was considered an outlier. Maybe there was a problem there, that one didn't produce much fruit because a branch broke off during the experiment, or something else happened, that there was a flock of birds that ate all of the fruit. So that one's considered an outlier, and so I'm going to remove that from the analysis. Now, the important thing that you note when I do this in Excel is that the average automatically changes, as does that dot. So by doing it this way, we now have live, and that each of those changes make sense. So this is a bit more what we expected, is that the mass goes up and then levels off. This isn't shown particularly well by this graph because there's so much blank space down here. So again, in order to represent the data best, we might actually want to change that scale. So you can click on that element. If you double click it, you end up with the ability over here to change the minimum. If I change the minimum to an average of 80, it's changed that scale there, and we can see that a little bit better. You also might want to resize this. Okay, so there's a fairly good graph. Last thing we need to do in order to have this ready to put into our report is to draw a line of best fit. Now, if this was just a straight line, you can use the trend line built into Excel. So add elements, trend line, and we can put a linear trend line in. That's fine for physics, but you'll notice it doesn't match our data particularly well. A lot of what we get in biology is curved data, so I'm going to take that out. So unfortunately for biology, often we just have to draw in a line of best fit. So I'm going to use insert shapes and use this curve tool. It'll take you a bit of practice to get used to this, but basically my method is to click on the first data point, click maybe about halfway between those ones, and then I'm just going to click that on the last one. Actually, I meant to do a double click. Like I said, it takes a couple of practice to get it right. Let's do that one again. You must remember to double click at the end. So click on the first one, midpoint, 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 double click. Alright, and there's my line of best fit. So the important thing about a line of best fit is it should smoothly go through your lines, your points as best possible, and you would perhaps expect an even scattering of ones above and below the line. So I've got two that are on the line, two below and one above, so that's about right, and it fits those nicely. It also needs to fit somewhat with the theoretical understanding that as we're increasing the level of water, we're getting more and more fruit produced, and then as we go beyond about 25 litres per day, we're not getting any more increase beyond the 160 kilos of fruit produced. Final thing then is to make sure we take this and copy and paste that over into our report, and then you're good to go. So you've got a graph that has the labels axes labeled. I might just move that up a little bit, with units on those labels, a scatter plot with a line of best fit. All of those things mean you have a great graph. In terms of your table, this one's fairly small, so you could put the whole thing in your report. If we had lots more raw data, I might just ask you to plot the dependent variable, the independent variable and the dependent variable, and not include the raw data in your table. Hope that helps, and if you've got any questions about doing graphs, please talk.